Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the very first video of Advanced Bass Fishing with Randy Blockett, man. Glad to have you guys here and much appreciated you guys supporting the channel and subscribing to the channel. And to kick off our first video here for the channel, we're going to be talking about jerkbaits. This is probably, jerkbaits and jigs are probably my favorite two lure categories. And we're going to dive into jerkbait fishing into the most extreme detail that you've ever seen before. And what we're going to do in this particular video, we're going to be talking about everything about the jerkbaits as far as like action, color, how to work them, characteristics of the bait and that type of stuff. And in another video down the road, I'll be talking about how to fish them as far as where to look for, type of areas to fish. We'll probably maybe even go to the lake for that particular video, but we're going to get into that. And also guys, all of the products here that I'm talking about, they're available at Baitworks. I'll put the link in the description. If you guys would like to use that link, it's a good way to support the channel here. So much appreciated. But anyway guys, starting out here before we get into the video, I'll explain a little bit about the channel here. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to try to mix it up between getting some stuff on the water and doing more of a classroom environment here. But I really think there's a lot of value to the classroom instruction because it's really specific, and a lot of you guys on a video this long, you can listen to it, you know, while you're driving or, you know, while you're working around the shop or whatever like that. You don't necessarily have to watch it, but I know a lot of people like to see on the water stuff, so I'll try to do some of that, but it's sort of limited since it's just me and all I've got is my cell phone, so it's a little bit harder. But this is sort of, consider this more like you're in a college classroom or something like that. So we'll get into that. Anyway, guys, before we get into it, I want to give you a little bit of history into jerkbaits. It's sort of, I think it's important leading up to you know, today's topic. But I had a chance to get into the jerkbait fishing when it just started. Jerkbait fishing pretty much originated here, right in my part of the country, in the Ozarks, Bull Shoals Lake, Table Rock Lake, back in the mid-'70s. And back then, all we fished with these things called a Rebel spoonbill minnow, which was I've talked about it a little bit before on my other channel, but it was a really pretty rudimentary jerk. It wasn't really a jerk bait. It was a deep lip. It was a deep lip model. In fact, let me show you one here. And it was originally designed for striper fish, and that's what everybody fished with them for, was for stripers. And this is what it was. This was the old spoonbill ribble. This is what we fished for the first 5 or 10 years I started jerkbait fishing. This is the only thing people used. And we used to take this thing and reel it down next to cedar trees and let it suspend and catch a lot of big bass doing that. And these things floated up like a cork. So we'd wrap like lead solder around the hook. So we came a long way as far as jerkbait technology. This was an extremely effective lure, but at the same time the quality control was poor because most of them ran off to the side. You'd never get one that would run straight. They'd all run crooked, and then you try to adjust them here on the eye, and when you tried to adjust them, it would strip out the screw in there. So it was almost impossible to get one to run right. But once you did get one to run right, it was like gold because they worked good. But anyway, the evolution of that slowly started taking place, and they started getting more into the rogue minnows, which I'll show you one right here. This sort of like took the place of the spoonbill rebel. Should have got this out before. I'll just pull this one out. The rogue Smithwick rogue minnow, which was sort of the predecessor. Excuse me, was the one that sort of followed the spoonbill rebel. And actually, guys, the Rogue and the Bomber Long A were the primary jerkbaits up until the 90s when Megabass introduced the ones that we're going to talk about here. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before, but everybody's familiar with the Megabass Vision 110 pretty much. It's the most famous jerkbait in the world. Guys, I helped design this bait, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about it, how it came about. I was with Megabass. I've been with Megabass since 1992, and in the late 90s, they wanted to have a jerkbait in their line because they didn't have a jerkbait. So what I did is I took all of my custom painted Rogues and Rebels and that type of stuff that I had weighted perfect, and I had them custom painted, and I shipped about a dozen of them over to Japan to Yuki Ito, the owner of Megabass. And through those baits here, Yuki came up with the final design of the Megabass 110 through my custom ones that we sent over there and worked on a little bit. But the Japanese technology that came about with like the Megabass jerkbaits was a huge transitional metamorphosis in the sport, because it expanded jerkbait fishing to beyond just a cold water technique to where now it's 12 months out of the year with that. So that's sort of where we led up to now, and now a lot of different companies have jerkbaits in there. So what we're talking about here, guys, you guys know that I work with Megabass. You know, like I said, helped design the Vision 110. We're going to be talking about all Megabass jerkbaits. Now, you may have another type of a jerkbait that you like to use. I have never seen one, guys, that can compete with Megabass. You know, this is not an ad. This is a reality check. Fishing as long as I have with jerkbaits, with guys that have been in the boat with me with other stuff, I've never seen another brand of jerkbait that can outproduce a Megabass. That's why every pro in the country uses them or has used them at some point. If you've got a different brand you'd like to use, good luck with that, because if you get in the boat with a Megabass next to it, they're going to be hard to beat. And the main thing about it is the quality of the components in there, and a little bit about the balancer systems and color variations, action, all that type of stuff. So that's for another conversation. So anyway, let's get into the seminar here, what we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to go into color before we start everything else. Color is probably more important in jerkbait fishing than about any other lure category out there, because to a large degree, jerkbait fishing is a sight-oriented strike. In other words, the strike that is generated from a jerkbait comes from the actual visual sight of the bait most of the time, not all the time. There is some elements that we'll talk about as far as, you know, different water clarities where the sound of the bait and the water displacement and the vibration attracts the fish. But for the most part, when you're fishing jerkbaits, it's generally considered a cleaner water technique, not a clear water technique. But for the most part, you're going to find that your best jerkbait fishing takes place where you have water visibilities of at least 2 feet. And if you're dealing with 2 feet or greater water visibility, sight becomes a huge factor, especially as it gets cleaner, like more towards the 4, 5, 6 foot visibility on there. That's why color is paramount to catching fish on a jerkbait. When you're talking about what actually causes a bass to bite a jerkbait, in my opinion, it's like you got a balance of a couple different elements. You've got the color that has to be right, you've got the profile of the jerkbait, you've got the sound, you've got the vibration, and you've got the action and the retrieve cadence and everything that goes with it. So that is why jerkbait fishing, guys, is probably the most difficult technique to master, is because a lot of times if you have one of those elements off, let's say for example your cadence isn't right, the fish may not react to it. Let's say for example the size of your jerkbait is not what the fish want, they're not going to bite it. Let's say for example the color's not right, they're not going to bite it. So in order to maximize and catch the most fish on a jerkbait, all of those elements have to come in together, and that's what we're going to try to tie here in this video. So first of all, let's talk about colors a little bit. I want to go into the different variations, and when we're talking about colors and jerkbaits, we're talking about 3 different types of colors. We're not going to go into specific color because like Megabass makes over 150 colors of jerkbaits. I haven't even tried all of them. So you can't, when you're talking about picking the right color jerkbait, don't get really caught up in a specific color. Get focused more on the 3 categories of color, what I'm going to talk about. And those 3 categories are your metallic finishes. Now, this is the metallic finish. You can see it's got sort of a foil finish on it and it reflects. That's one category. The next category is what you call the translucent finish, or an SP in the Megabass, which is a clear. See my finger behind it there? This is a translucent see-through type color. And then the final one is a matte finish or a flat finish, where it's not see-through, not metallic, it's just a flat finish there. Now, those are the categories you have to focus on. Now, there's specific colors within each one of those categories that you can have your favorite. Everybody's got their favorite. I've got my favorite. You probably have your favorite too. But when you're talking in terms of initially trying to pick out a color in a jerkbait, this is what you have to consider of these three finishes. Now, there's ultimately, you have to let the fish decide what they want, but there is some foundational elements that you can go by to sort of give you a start, because you got to have a starting point. And the starting point behind choosing one of these three lure category colors is the conditions. It's not only the sky conditions, but it's also the water clarity conditions. So here's a general rule of thumb when you're picking out colors. First of all, if you're fishing in a little bit more off-colored water, or if you're fishing in low light conditions, let's say for example it's early in the morning, there's still a lot of shade on the water, or it's cloudy, it's rainy, that type of stuff, you're going to find that the matte, flatter finishes will get you more bites. Because what happens on a matte or flatter finish is when you have this in the water, it sort of puts out a little bit of a glow in those low light conditions. And it's been my experience that glow that it puts out will generate, a few more strikes under that condition. So that's one of the things I started out with that. If you have a scenario where you have fairly clear water or clear water, like cleanest water conditions that you encounter, and if you have brighter sunlight conditions, say for example it's partly cloudy or it's sunny, not much wind, water's really clear, that's when you need to use the translucent finishes, because the translucent finishes, they blend in a little bit more, they're a little bit more subtle, and it will draw a strike from a bass that would normally get spooked by more aggressive color. So on those brighter days, the translucent color is going to work pretty good for you. And then on the days that you have a lot of wind, and also if you have a tremendous amount of wind and you have a little bit of stain in the water, it doesn't have to be like dirty, but if you have water visibility sort of in that 2 to 3 foot zone and you've got wind, that's when the metallic finishes works really good, because the metallic finish is going to put off your maximum amount of flash to attract fish from a long way away. So the metallic finish may not be the best lure for like a clear water situation, although it can be good in clear water if you have an extreme low light condition. Let's say for example it's raining out all day. Say you got a 20-mile-an-hour wind and it's rainy, then the metallic finish can be pretty good in clear water, simply because those low light conditions, the flash is needed more into those low light conditions, even though the water's clear. But most of the time I'm using the metallic. If we get out there and like I said, I've got 2.5 foot of water visibility, and it's a pretty windy day and it's fairly bright out, partly cloudy or sunny, that's when the metallic works pretty good with that. Now, another thing about the color here, guys, is that's a foundation. And one of the things that you're going to find out in bass fishing is that bass rarely, follow advice or read books or, follow the things people say in seminars. So, although that's a foundation to begin your search with, ultimately you have to let the bass tell you the color they want. Because I have followed these guidelines like I just set you out there and just told you, and I've had some awesome days on the water. And then sometimes I'll be fishing with somebody that's throwing a different color that I wouldn't throw under those conditions, and they catch fish. So even though that's a base foundation to begin your search with, you got to stay open-minded with color. And the best way that I can tell you guys about how to simplify this and not get intimidated or get frustrated or lose confidence that you don't have the right color is, once you get into an area that you're pretty confident there's a few fish in, or say for example you get into an area that you've caught a couple fish in but you think there should be more fish, try a color for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and if that doesn't work, just try something else on. Try that color for 15 or 20 minutes. If it's working, fine. If it doesn't work, just keep experimenting with color. And I can't tell you how many times that I have tried 5 or 6 different colors before I got on the color the fish wanted. Now this is what happens in jerkbait fishing, and this is why it's such a difficult technique, is that a lot of people will say, well man, I fished a jerkbait today and I never got a bite on it. And then somebody else will say, well man, I ripped them on a jerkbait today. And then you'll talk about color, and somebody will say, well I never tried that color, and somebody will say, well I couldn't get them to hit anything but this color. So don't underestimate the importance of color with that. And also with color, guys, another factor with color is the belly color on a lure, because different lures have different colors of bellies on them like that. And sometimes the belly color can make a big difference. Like for example, I've seen times where like a chartreuse belly or a, let me see if I can find one here. Yeah, just one second, guys. I've seen situations where like a bright colored belly can be super effective under certain conditions. Like this LG bone here on the Megabass 110, see that yellow bottom right there? Now again, this would be really good like in low light conditions, dirtier water, low light conditions, something like that is critical on that, especially if the bait is up over their head with that. So belly color in combination with the side color can be a really big determination factor if you're going to catch them or not. One of the fine-tuned things, I dropped the hook down here a second ago, one of the things that you're going to learn sort of on a high level in jerkbait fishing after you've done it for a while is you're going to be able to look in the water and tell if you have the right color. Now I've talked about this a little bit before in some of the jerkbait videos I've done, but what I mean by this is when you, because a lot of people say, Randy, how do I know what color to use? And I give them the foundation, but ultimately this is the test for it that works for me more than anything else. If you have your jerkbait in the water, say for example, you just reel it alongside the boat, a couple inches under the water, you want a color that stands out just a little bit in the water, yet blends in a little bit in the water, is what I'm saying. There's a fine line. You don't want to have a jerkbait in the water that like stands out, like a sore thumb, and then you don't want to have a color that just blends into the water. So say for example, if you're fishing dirty water, water visibility is 2 foot deep and it's rainy out and cloudy, if you try throwing a translucent color under those conditions with the low light and the fact that the translucent is see-through, this thing's going to look invisible in the water. So that's not going to be a good color for that. And then on the other situation, if it's a clear water situation, it's fairly bright and sunny out, and you try to throw a metallic in that type of a situation, this thing, you're going to be able to see it from a mile away. It's a little bit too bright. So this is something that comes with experience, and it changes all the time, because the way that a color looks in the water is dependent upon not only the water clarity, but it's dependent upon the tint of the water, it's dependent upon the sunlight angle, the light intensity, the shade and sun mix. There's a lot of different variables. Plus, on top of that, the way that a lure or the way that a jerkbait color looks in the water, say at 9 o'clock in the morning, is going to be completely different from the way it looks at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the exact same spot, because the light intensities change. So if there wasn't enough to already confuse you, that's just another element with that. So and by the time you get to this, you're going to say, well, God dang, there's so many things to remember in this jerkbait fish, and I'm never going to catch with a fish in it. Guys, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you the reality of the situation. But one of the realities of the situation is, yeah, you may not have the right color, you may not have the right retrieve, you may not have the right profile, but you're still probably going to catch a few fish. What we're trying to do in this video is we're trying to maximize your day on the water. We're trying to allow you, if you get into an area or a main lake point or something where you've caught 1 or 2 fish on, we're trying to get it where you can catch, 10 fish instead of 1 or 2. That's what the video is about here. So anyway, that's the color situation there. So anyway, next guys, let's talk about profile, and I'm going to take a quick break here and get a drink because I've been talking for 20 minutes, so I'll be right back. Okay guys, we're back here. Get into lure profile. Now, jerkbaits, like any other lure out there, you have different sizes on them. And the sizes on a jerkbait, they're going to be for different applications, different type of scenarios. And again, just like color, choosing the right profile and the right size of jerkbait is going to be critical to catching fish on it. It's super critical with that. At times, if you don't have the right profile and the right size, it's probably even more important than the color with there. So we're getting into that a little bit. So there's a lot of different types of styles and profiles on jerkbaits, even especially in the mega bass line. But what we're going to do is we're going to put it into categories, just like we did with color. So we're going to talk about the large size jerkbaits, the average size jerkbait, and the small jerkbaits, when you want to use what. So the large jerkbaits, guys, for an example, this is the mega bass line here. This is the mega bass Canada, and this is the mega bass LBO right here. These are the two biggest jerkbaits that mega bass makes. And to give you a size comparison, this is the mega bass Vision 110, which is the mid-size popular one. Here's sort of a size comparison with that. So anyway, guys, when do you want to use the big ones like the LBO and the Canada, the big oversized jerkbaits here? Here's when the oversized jerkbaits are going to work the best. It's all about conditions. It's all about situations. Number one, the lake that you fish has a lot to do with it. And if you fish a lake that has quality fish in it, like say the lake you fish has, it doesn't have to have a giant population of 4-pound fish, but if you've got a lake that has a decent amount of 4-pound fish, a bigger jerkbait is going to be more productive than if you fish a body of water that doesn't. Say, for example, if you guys fish the Ohio River that is not known for big fish, you're probably not going to catch many on a big jerkbait. But if you fish a lake like Toledo Bend or Sam Rayburn, that could be a really good bait, simply because there's more larger bass in there. That's number one. The next thing with it is time of the year is probably more critical than anything else. I have found personally that there is a smaller window with a big jerkbait than any other lure jerkbait profile category there is out there. And in my opinion, guys, there's a temperature window that is between, say, 55 and 70 degrees when a large jerkbait works good. If it's cooler than that, not really so much. If it's warmer than that, not really so much. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for these jerkbaits, the big ones, to use them in the pre-spawn and into the early post-spawn. So for most part, when I'm using the big jerkbait like the Canada, it's going to be anywhere between, say, March to early May, in that time frame there. A lot of different reasons for this. Number one is that the bass are hungrier this time of year. They're getting ready to spawn. They want to feed up. More aggressive. There's more bigger female bass up shallow to bite the bigger ones. And then on top of that, in the pre-spawn time of the year, the shad forage, like the gizzard shad or the threadfin shad, they are at their largest size of all year long because they don't start spawning until like like May or June. So your shad are bigger. So your bait fish base is bigger. The fish are hungrier. That's why they like the bigger bait. That's going to be a big consideration with that. Also with that is I don't want to get into the areas because we're going to do that in a little bit different video. But one of the things that you are going to have to focus on when you throw the big bait too is, again, it's conditionally. As far as the weather conditions play a big role. You're simply not going to get many bites on a really big jerkbait unless you have the conditions of a little bit lower light condition and some type of a steady or falling barometric pressure. That way, say for example, you have it's been pretty stable for a while, or you have maybe there's a cold front approaching a couple days out, and there's a southerly airflow. This is when those bigger jerkbaits work a little bit better. When you have some wind, southerly airflow, and some type of overcast with it. That's what makes those bigger fish aggressive to go for a big bait. Because guys, when you're talking about a bait this size here, that's a big commitment to a fish. And this is, if you have a fish that's like not aggressive or not hungry or is not feeding, you're not going to get many bites on something like this. The fish have to have, and they have to be in the right mood and the right personality to commit to a bait this large. And normally it's that conditions of the wind, southerly airflow, lower light conditions. So that's one of the big aspects with that. So that's the big ones. The next profile, guys, is just the average size, like the Megabass Vision 110. This is just an average size jerkbait. It's a little bit less than 5 inches long. This day in and day out, you can't beat it, simply because it works in a wide range of conditions. It works in every type of weather condition, every type of water condition. If you don't have any other, desire to expand your jerkbait fishing into other lure or profiles, you can't go wrong with just the standard 4.5, 5-inch jerkbait like the Vision 110. Works good day in and day out. And then on the smaller side, guys, you have your baits like the, this is the Megabass X75 and this is the X80. These are smaller baits. You can see compared to the 110 how much smaller they are. These are finesse jerk baits, and guys, actually, these are some of my favorite. I probably like fishing a small jerkbait better than anything because I get so many bites on it. You'll get a lot more bites on a smaller jerkbait, and the reason that I like a small jerkbait is they're highly effective during the cold weather months. That's when I do most of my jerkbait fishing. Not all of it, but probably, I'm gonna guess 70% of my jerkbait fishing comes between the months of November and April. And you'll find that as the water gets colder in the wintertime, the smaller jerkbaits are gonna work a little bit better. Not a little bit better, a lot better, especially if you have some clear water situations and you have a mixed species lake. If you've got a lake that has some type of a mix of bass, like largemouth spotted bass, smallmouth bass, and you have a clear water environment where the water visibility is over 3 feet and you've got water temperatures that are under 55 degrees, guys, you cannot beat a small jerkbait. It will catch just as big a fish and it'll catch 10 times more fish. If you, say for example, if you go fishing with me, say we go down to Table Rock Lake in January, and we go out there for one of my on the water lessons, and I put you on an X75 here, the little small megabass, and I tie on this big megabass LBO. Guys, I probably won't get a bite all day long on the LBO, and you'll probably catch 20 on the little X75. This is the big difference between the two of it out there. And it doesn't, here's sort of like the paradox with it, because even though the shad are still large, in the wintertime like that, there's something about the water temperature that the fish do not want that big bait. Maybe it's because their metabolisms are a little bit slower and they don't need to eat as much. Could be a combination of different factors with the clear water. But guys, from, like I said, from November to early April, if I'm fishing clear water, I've at least got one small jerkbait tied on there. And also, guys, the colors are the same. When you're talking about the color aspects of the metallic or the see-through or the flat or matte finished, it's across the board on all these as far as how that works there. So that's sort of how I choose the colors there. Now, for the rest of the year, like for example, when you're not in what's considered prime jerkbait season, like from like June to October in that range, I catch more fish on the 110 size than anywhere. And if I'm fishing a jerkbait in warmer water, with the exception of fishing smallmouth up north, because smallmouth fishing is exceptional during the summer on jerkbaits, but for the most part, you're going to find the jerkbait action to be a little, not necessarily slower, but it's going to be a little bit different as far as where you fish it. But like I said, we'll get into that in a different video. But pretty much from like June until October, I'm going with the mid size. It just seems like I get a lot more bites with that on that. Okay. Let's get into line a little bit here. Line test. Now, for my jerkbait fishing, guys, I use straight fluorocarbon all the time. I use Seagar and VizX. For me, I think it's the best line out there to use, for jerkbait fishing. You never want to use braided fluorocarbon on jerkbait. Now, you guys have heard me talk before that I don't like braided fluorocarbon on anything. You especially do not want it on jerkbaits. I see some guys out there that try to fish their jerkbaits on braided fluorocarbon. And guys, it's a terrible choice for that, because number one, you need the stretch of straight fluorocarbon. If you have a braided fluorocarbon setup on there, you're not going to have enough stretch and you're going to lose a lot of fish, and you're not going to be able to impart the action on the lure like you need to with straight fluorocarbon. So stick with straight fluorocarbon. The next thing with that is you have to match your jerkbait to your line size based upon the conditions and what you're trying to accomplish with the bait, because line size is really, really critical as far as for controlling the depth that your jerkbait's going to get in. For example, you know, if I put the Megabass Vision 110 on 15-pound test in Vizex fluorocarbon line, this bait's probably going to run, you know, if you cast it a long way out there, it might get down to 5 feet on a super long cast. But if you put this on 6-pound test line and make a super long cast, you can get it down to almost double that depth. So the line size is really going to be determined by what you're trying to accomplish out of there. Now, if I'm fishing in the winter time, well, I know those fish are deeper and I need to get down that bait deeper. Guys, I use 6-pound test Seagarn Vizex almost all winter long. Now, there's a big difference between using 6-pound test and 8-pound test. And I'll get into how I fish it here in a second as far as on the spinning rod. That's what we're going to get into in just a second. But what you have on there is if you cast, say for example, if you take this X75 Megabass and you put it on 6-pound test line and make a cast on there, you might be able to cast it out there 50 yards. But if you put it on 8-pound test, you might be able to cast it 35 or 40 yards. And what that does is that reduction in the length of your cast is also going to be a determining factor in reducing the depth that your bait gets to. So let's say, for example, we're fishing a main lake point and you got water visibility of 4 feet and the water temperature is 42 degrees. And I'm looking for those fish to be suspended out there, maybe, you know, 10, 15 feet deep out off the point. I simply can't reach it with 8-pound test line, but I can with 6. And a lot of people are sort of hesitant to throw a $24 jerkbait on 6-pound test line, but guys, I don't ever lose them. One time I was at Beaver Lake and I caught a 37-pound striper on 6-pound test line on a Megabass X80. As long as a fish doesn't get you wrapped up around something, it's not going to break your line if you play the fish properly, if you back reel with it like I teach, and just take your time with it. Now, I don't care if you've got 10-pound test line. If you're fishing down there and the fish gets you wrapped up around a piece of standing timber and you can't get it off, you're going to break it off with 10 or 12-pound test line just like you would with 6. So don't get scared with 6-pound test line. Another thing about 6, and I use 6 a lot even on the Megabass Division 110. Another thing about 6-pound test line, guys, is it gives your bait better action. Your bait gets a lot better action with 6-pound test. It makes it more lively, and that's the big key. Since you're generating a visual strike, how the bait looks and manipulates in the water has a lot to do with it. So 6-pound test line is my go-to in the wintertime. Now, as I move up, say for example, and I'm getting more into the springtime of the year, maybe the fish are getting a little bit shallower, and I don't need to maximize that depth, that's when I can go up in pound test. But rarely, guys, do I ever go over 10-pound test line with a medium or small size jerkbait. I use 6 or 8 probably 90% of the time with that. I just don't feel there's any need to go heavier than that, with the exception is if you go to the big jerkbait. Now, if I use something like the Megabass Canada, this is the only bait that I throw on a bait cast reel. I throw the rest of them on spinning, which we'll get into a little bit. I may use 15 or 20-pound test line. Like for example, one of my favorite ways to fish this is fishing it on steep banks in the post spawn. And I only want this thing to get down 3 or 4 feet. I don't want it to get deeper because the fish are not deeper. I'll put it on 15, 20-pound test line. So it's all about determining the depth of the fish. And also with that, I know a lot of you guys are fishing lakes that have a lot of grass in it, for example. And if you're fishing a lake like Lake Chickamauga, Sam Rayburn, maybe some Florida lakes like that, that's another case where you can get away with a little bit heavier line because you don't need the bait to get down as deep. I mean, the last tournament I fished down at Lake Toho in Florida, I finished in the, I think, 13th or 14th in the tournament, and I caught all my fish on a Megabass Vision 110, fishing it with 10-pound test line just over the top of the grass there. So let the depth of the bait, dictate how, light or heavy a line you want to go to. And good rule of thumb, guys, is always go lighter. If you have a determination as far as do I need to be heavier or lighter, always go lighter simply because it'll give you a little bit better action on your bait. So anyway, guys, the next we're going to get into a little bit more on cadence and retrieve. I'm going to take another drink. I'll be right back. Okay, guys, now let's talk a little bit about one of the most important aspects of actually triggering a fish to bite and making a fish to bite, and that's with how you retrieve the jerkbait and the cadence you use and the rhythm that you use. Guys, this is so critical. I can't even begin to tell you how critical it is as far as generating a strike, because a jerkbait is a lure that doesn't have much action on its own. If you throw a jerkbait through the water and just reel it in steady, it's just gonna just sort of go like that through the water, and you're just not gonna catch much. You have to make this jerkbait come alive in the water. And the extent of how you work a bait, or how the cadence is, or how they retrieve, it's dependent completely upon the water temperature and the water clarity and what you're fishing for, as far as how you want to work this. So we're going to sort of go over it by water temperatures and everything. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the rod you want to use. Now, guys, if you've watched my videos before on jerkbait fishing, or if you know much about me, the only thing I use for all my jerkbaits is a spinning rod. This is the Megabass Whip Snake. It's a 6'11" sort of a medium action spinning rod. This is what I use for my jerkbaits all the time. This is the Megabass Levante. Again, I'll put the Baitworks link in the description where you can get all this stuff. And I use this for every jerkbait except for the Canada. The Canada is the only bait that I use on a bait cast reel. Now, the reason I do this is for a lot of different reasons. Now, if you guys would go on an on the water lesson with me, I will get you converted to a spinning rod by the end of the day. Almost everyone I take out, they're converted by the end of the day. Number one is when you're throwing a spinning outfit, guys, you can use lighter line. Since I use 6 and 8 pound test line a lot, you can use lighter line and get away with it. You can't really use 6 pound test very good on a bait caster, but that's one of the biggest aspects, is you can go light. Sometimes I'll use 4, guys. On a little bait like the X75 like this, I'll use 4 pound test Seagar and Vizx sometimes, quite a bit on it. And you can get probably, I'm gonna guess, at least a 25% farther distance with the spinning rod. If you're in the boat with me, I don't care what bait caster you have, and I'm here with this spinning outfit, and we both got a Vision 110 on, I can cast this thing 25% farther than you can with that, simply because I can use the lighter line and just the nature of the bait. And also on a windy day, if you got a jerkbait, a lot of times casts like a potato chip in the wind, and a spinning rod will allow you to cast it any direction into the wind, 45-degree angle into the wind, with the wind, whatever. It's just better for that. The next thing with that, and the most important, is the manipulation that you can get. So here's what I'm talking about as far as the feel on it. If you make a cast on your jerkbait out there, try to get the camera down, I'm going to sort of run you through a little bit about how it needs to be manipulated and how it needs to be worked. I'll get the camera here, guys. There you go. How it needs to be worked. Now, most people, when they fish a here's how most people fish a jerkbait. They got a bait cast rod here, and they make the cast out there, and they throw it out there, and they jerk, jerk, pause, jerk, jerk, pause, jerk, jerk, pause. This is how you see everybody fish it like that. And yeah, that's going to work under certain conditions, but guys, not all the conditions. This is what we're going to talk about as far as cold water jerkbait fishing. Now, let's say, for example, we're going to go like winter, spring, summer, fall, that type of stuff. Let's say, for example, you're out there in the winter time, and you got, your little jerkbait like a Megabass, 110 Junior or something like that. Water temperature's cold. What you want to do is you want to cast it out there and jerk it down 5 or 6 times pretty quick without stopping it to get the bait down at its maximum depth. That's what you want to do. You want to get the bait as deep as it can. So anyway, we jerk it down 5 or 6 times. It's at the maximum depth. Now, once you get it to the maximum depth, let's say that you jerked it 5 or 6 times and you feel that the bait is as deep as it's going to get. This is what I call the sweet spot. Now, the sweet spot on your depth is when your jerkbait comes down and it's at the maximum depth. Let's say I'm at the max depth, let's say 7 feet here. When you're at that maximum depth, this is the sweet spot where you're going to catch your biggest fish. You're always going to get your biggest fish when that jerkbait is at its deepest point, but you don't have much time down there. Depending upon the length of your cast, you're going to have maybe 5 to at the very most 10 or 15 feet of the bait at the maximum depth before it starts coming up as you bring it up towards the boat there. So that's why a long cast is critical. The longer the cast you make, the longer your bait's going to be in the sweet spot. Now, when your bait is in the sweet spot, this is when you have to manipulate it and have the right cadence. And this is what you do in cold water. When you throw it out there and you get it down, let's say it's at the deepest point, this is why the spinning rod is a better piece of equipment, because what you want to do is you just want to twitch it just like that. See how my hand is just barely twitching it like that? So I twitch it like that, and this bait is like barely moving just like that through the water. And in that cold water, they don't want a big aggressive dart. They just want like a little, like a minnow. If you've ever seen a minnow swim in cold water, it's barely moving. So the spinning rod gives you a better feel to put that little twitch like that on it. So I'll get it down there and I'll twitch it a couple times, and then I'll maybe pop it 1 or 2 times and let it set, and then just barely twitch it like that a little bit more. Boom, boom, pop it like that a couple times, let it set. And most of the time, you know, they're gonna hit it after you pop it like that and it's setting still, unless the water's super cold. If the water's super cold, they'll hit it when you're just barely twitching like that. Now, that's a departure from the people that are just like jerk, jerk, pause like that. You don't want to do that in cold water. This is so critical, I cannot tell you the difference it makes as far as your ability to generate strikes or not in cold water. And it's especially more critical if the water's a little bit more off-colored. Now, if you're in gin clear water, like say for example, you're fishing water visibility that's 15 feet, clear water will allow you to work the bait a little bit fast. So say for example, it's even super cold, but the water is just gin clear. I may cast it out there and I may twitch it a little bit harder and pop it a little harder. But if that water is off colored, man, I'm just barely moving it. And a lot of times, here's another little good tip for you guys. If the water is super cold and a little bit off colored, more towards that 2 to 3 foot visibility, a lot of times when I get it down to the max depth, I'll just barely turn the reel handle, and I won't put any action at all, and I'll just have that bait just move through that water column like that, and a lot of times those fish will hit it with that. So that's sort of the cold water environment condition with that. Now, as the water warms up, let's say as the water temperature gets above 60, that's when your cadence needs to increase with that, and you're not doing this twitching. It's like as that water temperature gets above 60 and into 70 and 80, that's when I'm going to the more, you know, traditional method like that. Not much of a pause. I'm trying to generate that reaction strike. And this is especially true if you're fishing for smallmouth. If you've got a lake that has a lot of smallmouth bass in it, especially you guys that fish up north, smallmouth like it fast. I mean, if I'm fishing up north, for example, in a smallmouth lake in the summertime, I'm throwing it out there and I'm not even trying to jerk it down. I'm jerking it to the side. Just boom, 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 boom. Trying to keep that bait high in the water column because those smallmouth want to come up on it. I'm not having any pause. I'm just jerking the heck out of it hard like that, trying to create that reaction strike in clear water. So this would be my advice, guys. This is as far as if you're looking for a rod, this 6'10", 6'11" length, like this whip snake here, it's just the perfect one. And it's got pretty much the perfect amount of tip. You want a tip that's got not like super soft, but you want a fairly soft tip on there. And what that does is a little bit softer tip. It allows you to get a little bit better action on the lure, and it also allows you to fight the fish better once it's hooked. Now, if I'm fishing the Canada, or sometimes like if I'm fishing the LBO, the larger jerk baits, and especially if I'm fishing those bigger jerk baits over grass, that's when I will go to the bait cast model. And it's not very much, guys. I don't fish it very much, maybe 5% of the year. And I use this Megabass Levante Jerkbait Special by Megabass. This rod here, like I said, it's perfect action for it. It's set up for jerkbait fishing. And the cadence is a little bit faster. On the bait caster with the big jerk baits, guys, I'm throwing it out there, you know, just jerking it down 3 or 4 pauses. And I'm still twitching a little bit. I'm not like jerk, jerk, pause, jerk, jerk, pause. I'm still throwing it out there and I'm twitching it and then popping it a couple times. Very similar to that, but it's a little bit more aggressive than with a spinning reel. And one of the things that you'll find also about the big jerk baits like this is you need to work it a little bit faster than the smaller jerk baits, because you do not want them to get a good look at this. If you have a bass that comes up and studies a bait and he looks at something this big, even as realistic as this thing looks, a lot of times they still will shy away from it here. And that's one of the things you got to understand about jerkbait fishing, guys, is if you're on a point, let's say on a main lake point, I don't use live scope, and I'm sure the live scopers can see this better than I do, but I'm telling you the reality of it. If you get on like a main lake or secondary point in the wintertime, there's going to be bass on that point. And it's my theory that almost every single cast that you make, there's a bass that at least, the jerkbait at least gets their attention. They may swim from 30 or 40 foot away to investigate it. They may get 5 or 6 feet away from it and turn off. But there's a lot of fish that they will track these jerk baits, and the live scopers will tell you this, even though I don't consider live scoping a legitimate means of catching bass. But they will come up on a jerk bait and they will study it, especially if it's not moving very fast, and they will just get all around it. And sometimes they'll get like within centimeters of this back hook and not catch it. So they're studying this thing and they're curious about it, but they know it's not real. So that's one of the biggest challenges with jerkbait fishing, is tricking that fish into biting that lure that they know is not real. And that is done by a combination of your cadence, your retrieve, your color. All that type of stuff makes a big factor there. Now, a couple other things, we're getting lower on time here. Let's talk a little bit about weighting the lure like this. These are suspend strips right here, guys. So you probably know what they are. They're lead strips that have an adhesive on the back of them here. And you can take them and you can put them on the belly of these jerkbaits here to get to weight them down. Now, a lot of times, if I'm fishing in cold water, this is about the only time I do it, I may want to get this bait down deeper than it can actually get. So sometimes I'll put that suspend strip on the bottom, 1 or 2 of them, and I'll let the bait sink down to the area that I think the fish are in. Now, say for example, if I graph out a main lake point and I'm looking on my depth finder and I can see bait fish activity and maybe some fish activity 20 foot down on this point, and the water's 40 foot deep, I can't get this jerkbait down 20 feet, but I can get it down 20 feet if I put some suspend strips on it, let it sink, and start working it down there. So sometimes that's, a really good way to catch them. And also, you may want them to suspend perfectly. Now, some of the mega bass guys, some of them float up a little bit, some of them suspend perfectly, some of them sink slowly. A lot of it has to do with the paint on it, because the paint weighs different. So there's a little bit of inconsistency with every jerkbait on how each jerkbait rises or falls. And also water temperature will affect the amount that a bait rises and falls. So it's a good idea to keep these suspend strips in the boat with you, as far as to be able to adjust it exactly. And next, guys, I want to talk a little bit about hooks here. Hooks are super critical on a jerkbait. Now, Mega Bass, it comes with the out barb hook stock on these. These are good hooks. I like them. They're a wire hook, so they do straighten out a little bit. But a lot of times I'll use these hooks straight from the factory like this. But when I do replace them, I go to the Gamakatsu G Finesse trebles. This is the treble that I found out that I really like on it. It's a light hook. It's a nano coated. It's super sharp on there. It's usually my go-to hook. And also, guys, if you're fishing for smallmouth, put on a red hook. This is a red Gamakatsu round bend treble hook that I found. If you're fishing smallmouth waters that have some pretty clear water, the red will get you a lot more smallmouth to commit to the bait than a regular hook. And also, guys, never go too big with your hooks. A lot of people I see with a jerkbait, they try to upgrade the size of the hook, thinking they're going to hook more fish and not lose them. This is a mistake, guys. You want to go to a smaller hook. And normally on my standard size Mega Bass Vision 110, I've got a little number 6 in the middle here. This is a little number 6. This is if I change them out. Number 6 in the middle, and 2 number 5s, which this is right here. 2 number 5s on the end, which are fairly small hooks with that. The problem you have is if you go to too big of a hook, like I said, it'll make the bait sink too fast. It'll impede the action of the lure a little bit. And the larger the hook that you have acts as a visual strike deterrent, because when this bait is suspended or barely moving through the water, don't think that the fish can't see these hooks. Just these hooks hanging down here like this, they are a strike deterrent. If you could take these hooks off of here and just have the bait with no hooks on it, you would definitely get more strikes. But the bigger hooks that you put on are going to take away the amount of strikes that you get. So always try to go with the smaller hooks that you possibly have there. But anyway, guys, that's some of the highlights on that jerkbait fishing. We'll get into more of this on the future as far as when we get into areas. There's another big long seminar. I'm going to try to get out on the lake, take you guys on the lake to show you some specific areas. But this is going to give you a good foundation to start from. If you adapt or adopt some of the information that I gave you here, you will definitely catch more bass on a jerkbait. This is something, what I'm talking about here, I've been doing this since 1976. So this is information that I've learned from my own experience. Every bit of this, guys, is my own experience. I've caught tens of thousands of bass on jerkbaits all over the country, one end of the country to the other. And this seminar that I just gave you there is it's the result of over 50 years of fishing a jerkbait, experimentation, learning the hard way, and there's some foolproof techniques. So anyway, hope it helps you guys out. Again, appreciate you guys tuning in for the first video here on advanced bass fishing, and look forward to having you guys back. So we'll talk later.